Welcome to another Books in Hindsight Encounters USA special presentation. Hello everyone, I'm Matthew Hines for Encounters USA. We are your one-stop podcast and YouTube channel for all things alien, Bigfoot, and Dogman. So relax, kick up your feet, grab one of your favorite beverages, and enjoy the show.
Books, works, and ideas of this. Now, here's your host, teacher, and author, Matthew Hines.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another amazing podcast. Today, we're going to be doing another twofer. Today, we're going to be doing a Books in Hindsight podcast as well as Encounters USA. Now, if you are on the Books in Hindsight side, maybe you don't know about Encounters USA. At Encounters USA, we do aliens, Bigfoot, and Dogman. On Books in Hindsight, we talk to writers about the writing process, about the obstacles in the writing process, and about the methods they use for success. So we have a very special guest today. The guest we have today fits both categories because he's an author and he's also on the search for Bigfoot. And what is amazing, he's on the search for Bigfoot in Alaska. So it's going to be really amazing to talk to our guest today. And our guest today is Larry Beans Baxter. And he is coming to us, I will say live now, but it won't be when you are watching or listening. But he's coming to us from Homer, Alaska. So Beans, welcome to Encounters USA and Books in Hindsight.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for taking the time out of your schedule. So the book that we want to talk about now is we want to talk about Abandoned. And because we're going to be talking about the book, the podcast, etc. So the first thing that I want to talk to you about is, having lived in Alaska myself, what was the inspiration to there's so many other things you could be doing. How do you possibly sit down and write a book when you're in Alaska?
Usually that's something I do in the wintertime.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. I spend a lot of time outdoors in the summer, and usually, in the wintertime when it starts getting colder and when the snow comes in, especially when the snow comes in, because a lot of the areas where I like to go, they're pretty difficult to get to in the wintertime. Mm-hmm. So I like to write in the wintertime, and I've got, plans for more books that I'll probably start writing here this spring, and I probably won't finish till this winter. But yeah, it's pretty much a wintertime thing. I like to gather my material and inspiration in the summertime, and then I like to write in the wintertime. So, it gives me something to do in the wintertime. I mean, I do get out occasionally in the wintertime and do some winter activities like snowshoeing, and I plan on going hunting this year for the first time in like 20 years or something. But for the most part, I'm a fair weather squatcher. So I stay in and like to write in the wintertime.
Okay, well, let's talk about the book. When did the book come out?
It came out earlier this month, like March 9th. And yeah, and I kind of, I didn't really promote it until this week. As you know, because I'm publishing it through Amazon, and with Amazon, the book has to be live in order to get your author copies. So I went ahead and went live with it a few weeks ago and ordered my author copies, and I was kind of waiting for them to come in before I started to really promote it. And I still haven't got my author copy. So that's when we start talking about the writing and experiences with that. I can really go into more detail about that, but I'm still waiting on my author copies. That was kind of a rookie mistake, miscalculation. I should have waited until I had the copies in my hand, but I kind of jumped the gun a little bit and started promoting the book before I got them.
Yeah, but I have had a couple of experiences with Amazon as well, and yours, I don't want to say it's typical, but it's not always the way you want it to be, and generally, it's usually your first book that things just go horribly wrong, and everything that you depended on isn't happening. So let's talk about you. What did you pick? March. What is so big about March that you chose to publish now?
Well, I wanted to get the book out before summertime, before that summer, because people will get, the summer reading lists. People will, go on vacation. They want a book to take on vacation with them. I did some reading, some research that said, like February, March was a good time to release. And it just so happened the book was going to be done around that time. So that's what I was shooting for. Plus, I recently retired in January. So I kind of wanted to get it out, not too long after that, so that I would have maybe some revenue coming in to help me out after I retired. So it was just kind of a lot of different things aligning at the same time. Mm-hmm. And that's just when I started to shoot for. Plus, I wanted to get it out before the Medellin Falls event in June, so that I could have copies available there at that event.
Okay. Yeah, we're going to be talking about the Medellin Falls Bigfoot Festival, where Beans will be speaking. Let's go back to you were talking about your idea of promoting your book. So going through the writing process myself, you publish the book, and then after the first week, you're not a millionaire. So I assume, I don't know if that's your experience, but generally that's the author experience. Did you start to see what you thought you would see when the book came out?
No, because I'll tell you why. Before publishing the book, I did a lot of reading and research into publishing, and I had, before I published, I had it in my mind, I'm going to do a Kindle version, I'm going to do a paperback version. Just, I don't know. I thought that was the way to do it. And right before I published, I started reading a lot of people's experiences who were saying, my book's been out for 3 years. I've sold one Kindle version, or my book's been out, for a million years, and I haven't sold any Kindles, but I've sold, like 1,000 paperbacks, or, I just got this impression that Kindle books would not sell, and they weren't going to sell. I hit the live button on March 9th, and before I went to bed that night, I think I had sold 2 Kindle copies. Mm-hmm. And right now, I just checked this morning just before I jumped on here with you. Kindle and paperback sales are pretty much neck and neck. I think I'm ahead on paperbacks just a little bit, maybe by 2 or 3, but I've sold about 100% more Kindle copies than I thought I would. Mm-hmm. So that was not what I expected after what I've read.
Uh-huh. Well, that's fantastic. And part of the success I think you're seeing is the subject matter. So let's talk about the title of the book. It's Abandon. The horror. I'm sorry. Tell me if I've got this right. Let me just pull this up here really quick, because it's, I do the same thing. My titles are a little bit longer too. So the book is Abandon: The History and Horror of Port Chatham, Alaska. Now, am I pronouncing that right?
Most of the locals here say Chatham, but I think, people say Chatham, and I think if you're from New England, it's Chatham. Yeah. So it does. I don't think it really matters. I think there's only one Port Chatham, Alaska. So as long as you throw that Alaska in there, people know what you're talking about. Yeah.
So I think you have some really great elements there right from the start. You have the idea of a town that somehow in Alaska just became abandoned. And I know there are a lot of towns in Alaska that, like Kennecott Mines and all of those that did become abandoned, but this one became abandoned for a particular reason. And this leads you into kind of the paranormal. So we're going to be talking a lot about your research and the things that you've done. But for right now, when you said, I'm going to write a book, what was it about this topic in this place that said, yeah, that's going to be the book?
Well, it actually started out as a different book. I've always had an interest in Bigfoot and the paranormal and Fortean stuff in general. Ever since I was a little kid, I don't think there's a there's not an enthusiast out there that's over 30 that's not going to say, I watched In Search Of and The Legend of Boggy Creek, and same, what do you call it? We're just all cut from the same cloth, just it's all, it all goes back to the same like 2 or 3 TV shows, $6 Million Man, In Search Of, and Legend of Boggy Creek. So I've always had that interest. I've always been fascinated with it. Growing up, I read a lot. I'm a voracious reader. I mean, there's a book, look at a bookshelf back there. I don't read as much as I used to, but growing up, I read a ton. I grew up across from a library. They had a bunch of books on monsters and Bigfoot and stuff. I read every one of them. And it was something that's always been with me. Maybe, at different places in my life, it meant more or less. It's kind of waxed and waned as time has went on. And when I think it was 2016, I had some stuff happen to me. I found some tracks at a lake that I was hiking at. And then my wife and I had gone back into that area, and we kind of got escorted out of the woods by something. And that just lit a fire. And I was like, I gotta know more about this. And I ended up, doing some more Bigfoot reading and research. And I met up with Adam Davies at the International Bigfoot Conference in 2017. And we kind of hit it off. I really enjoy Adam and his work. And he told me he was coming to Alaska, and I didn't know it at the time, but he was going to Port Chatham, which is not far at all from where I live. And of course, I'd heard the legends and stuff about Port Chatham, how the natives say that's where the Nantinaq Bigfoot lives. And, it's a dangerous place. Don't go there. People have died there. And Adam told me he was going there. And I was like, dude, that's amazing. You gotta get back with me when you get back, because you can't really get there without going through where I live. So he contacted me when he got back, and he had brought Stephen Major with him. Him and Stephen had gone out there to scout for an upcoming documentary that Stephen wanted to make. And so we kind of met, I say the reason I got into this because Adam Davies wanted a free drink. He called me up and he's like, hey, I'm in town if you want to meet at this bar. So I sat around with him and Stephen for a few hours, talking Bigfoot, and I bought them some drinks and they bought me some drinks. It was mutual. And we had a really good time. Well, fast forward a little bit, and Stephen contacted me and said, hey, Adam can't make it to come film the documentary. Would you like to go? And I jumped on it because I wanted to go to Port Chatham so bad I couldn't stand it. Mm-hmm. But it's very difficult to get to. It's only 40 miles away from where I'm sitting here talking to you right now, which doesn't seem very far at all. But it's very expensive to get out there. You have to charter a boat. You have to charter a certain size boat because it's around the corner at Kachemak Bay. It gets out into the rougher waters. So you have to take a bigger boat out there. So it costs more money to get out there, and not too many people are willing to go out there. And it's not that it's, fishing boats and hunting charters and stuff, they go in there all the time to get out of the weather and, to take breaks from, wherever they're going from or to set and eat or whatever, but nobody goes ashore. And it's really difficult to get somebody that's willing to drop you off and then come back and get you later. I guess it's the liability thing. They don't want to be responsible for dropping some people off that go in and get, eat by bears or Bigfoot or whatever. So it's kind of a hard mission to get somebody that's willing to take you in there and drop you off. Mm-hmm. So I jumped at the chance to go, and we went, and it was Stephen and I and a local cameraman named Josiah, and his brother who came along to help, and then 2 other. They weren't really Bigfoot researchers, which I thought was a good idea on Stephen's part to take some people that weren't Bigfoot people in there. On the one hand, it's like, well, maybe they're not too keen on what to be looking for or what to do. But on the other hand, it's a fresh set of eyes that they're not going to be, every noise, every bump in the woods isn't going to be Bigfoot. So it had pros and cons to it. And I thought that it worked out pretty well. And there's a lot of stuff actually that didn't make it into the documentary that I thought would have been very, very beneficial to go in. But like I said, the guy, Josiah, he's a local guy. He's not a Bigfooter. He was more interested in documenting our trip and telling the story of our trip in there than he was documenting the evidence. And, I've said a few times to Stephen, like, man, we found some stuff that just didn't make it into the film, some tracks and stuff that I think would have been very interesting. And that's what I hear. I was like, you guys didn't show enough tracks and stuff. And I'm like, I agree with you. But yeah, that's kind of what got me onto the Port Chatham thing. And I started the book. It started out, it was just going to be about Bigfoot on the Kenai Peninsula. Just general Bigfoot encounters and stuff. Mm-hmm. And as I started writing the book, Port Chatham just started taking over the whole book. And I started looking more into Port Chatham and researching more into Port Chatham and talking to people about Port Chatham. And if you Google Port Chatham, all you're going to see is like the same half a dozen stories, just retold over and over again, regurgitated. There's a finite amount of information out there on the subject. Mm-hmm. And in my research, I discovered stuff that wasn't public knowledge. It's not on, you can't Google it. It's not on the internet. And when I got some of that information and when I started compiling that, I thought, man, I actually have something to offer here. This isn't just going to be another Bigfoot book where you take the same encounters and stories and stuff that's been going around for years and just repackage it and sell it. I was like, I have something that's new and I have something new to offer. So I thought, man, I've got to write this book. I've got to put this book together about Port Chatham. And that's kind of how it came together. It started off as a different book, and then it kind of took its own path. It started going down its own road there. And the information that I uncovered, I was just like, man, I've got something to offer here. And I felt like it was important to get it out there because a lot of these people that lived in Port Chatham, they're reaching an advanced age and they're starting to pass away, and these stories are just going away. And once these people die, their stories are gone. So I thought it was important to document a lot of this so that it was there, so it could be referenced in the future and not just go away. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of how the book kind of grew its own legs and started taking off for me.
Okay, that is a great story. So I have a whole bunch of things that I want to ask you, but before we go into all of that, I just want to tell you this. When I first went to Alaska, I did my master's in University of Alaska in Anchorage, and a friend of mine said, "Oh, we were going out to Cordova, and we're going to go get the herring roe off the kelp." Are you familiar with that opera? Yeah. Okay, so when I was watching your movie, and let me just I'm going to throw this on when we do the podcast on YouTube, you'll see the name here. But your movie is called I cannot In Search of the Port Chatham Harryman or Chatham Harryman. So when I'm watching the movie and I'm watching the boat cruising along that water, I say to my wife, I was scuba diving in that water. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there just so you know how like mentally unstable I am, that I would actually be scuba diving in that water. And the whole time I was waiting for some orca to mistake me for some seal and chomp me in half. So that was my experience. But, from the beginning of the movie, it's like spooky, right? And it really, those opening scenes really set the mood for the movie. Was the book first and then the movie, or simultaneous, or one and then the other?
If it wasn't for the movie, there wouldn't be a book. Basically, because I had been to Port Chatham and had firsthand experiences with the area, that kind of led me to the book. And then, going there and having those experiences, I thought I had some, again, you got the same information on the internet, going back and forth and regurgitating. I thought, well, not too many people at all have actually been to Port Chatham. So again, I thought that was something unique that I had to offer in the book. So yeah, if it wasn't for Adam and Steven, then the book wouldn't have came about, because I would have never went to Port Chatham. I may have written a Bigfoot book, but it would not have been a Port Chatham book.
Okay. So having lived in Alaska, I never heard of Bigfoot. Not that I was really that much into the subject. Always been more of a UFO guy, but I never heard of Bigfoot, and my impression has always been too cold. But you guys found something else. So when you watch your documentary, your results are there. Leading up to that documentary, though, you said you talked to people that were in Port Chatham. Do you know? Okay, so do you know what happened to the missing hunters, the people in the water that they found? Do you know what happened to them?
So I touch on this quite a bit in the book. The problem with a lot of that stuff is it's so generalized. You know, there's missing hunters, there's missing people, and there's no dates or names attached. Mm-hmm. And working in law enforcement, you know, I that's what I was after was, you know, give me something I can verify, or give me something, you know, let me be able to find some death certificates or a newspaper article or something. And I really worked really hard on trying to identify some of these missing people. And like I expand a little bit more on it in the book, but I did eventually get a name of someone, and I put in quite a bit of work trying to find the death certificate. And I don't want to spoil the book, so let's just say I didn't find concrete evidence of what happened to him, but I did find some evidence that did corroborate some things. But yeah, a lot of the problems with researching this area, this is kind of funny because are you familiar with the Beast of Gévaudan?
No.
Okay, so that happened. How was it was it the 17th century? It happened a really long time ago in France. It was this creature. They thought it was a wolf. It was going around. It was killing people. It killed like 100 and some people. You know, they were hired hunters to come in and try and track it down. It was a big thing. And recently, podcast that I listened to, they did a big, like 2 or 3 hour long story about it. And I was listening to it, and they were talking about like, yeah, on this date, the monster killed like this person at this place, you know, at this time in the afternoon. And I'm like, this happened like 200 or 300 years ago. Yeah. They know who was killed, where they were killed, you know, like how they had descriptions of the wounds. And I'm like, you know, Port Chatham, that happened like, you know, 60, 70 years ago, and I can't even get a name. So it was kind of frustrating knowing that, you know, there's that much documentation on something that happened that long ago, but I can't find the names of some missing hunters from across the bay here that happened just, you know, within, you know, my parents' lifetime. And it was pretty frustrating, that part of the investigation. But you got to think, I mean, a lot of this stuff had happened before statehood. So it was before Alaska was a state. It was a territory. It wasn't an official state. There was no mandatory record keeping. And you got to, you know, also it's out in the bush, Alaska. It's out, you know, in a small village. Nobody is, you know, too worried about record keeping. You know, there's a lot of oral traditions handed down, that. And then when you do have record keeping, there's all kinds of things that can go wrong. You've got, you know, fires, floods, you know, roofs get overburdened with snow and collapse, and things get ruined. So historical research in Alaska in general can and is very difficult, can be very difficult. But to answer your question, I didn't get a whole lot of information on the missing people or the murdered people in Port Chatham, but I did find some collaborative evidence.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so just a very quick question just about your records and all of that. At the time that Port Chatham was a, you know, fishing, I guess it was a cannery. Was it natives, or were there whites, or what was the population like?
So from what I understand, there was a lot of industry in Port Chatham. There was a large sawmill. There was the cannery, you know, the processing. I assume the cannery and the processing are probably the same operation. And there were a couple of little mink farms, and I think even a fox farm. Hmm. But the sawmill and the cannery were all owned by the same person. Hmm. Most of the infrastructure in the town was owned by one family, and I'm not 100% certain, but I believe it was a white family. And most of the workers were local natives from around the area. And I didn't really go into this in the book because I didn't have a whole lot of information on it, but I had gathered some information that there was some maybe some friction between the workers and the owner. And, he maybe didn't pay the people enough, or, he didn't pay them at all. Sometimes it sounded like he'd be like, oh, well, we had a bad year, can't pay you, or, here's half of what I promised you. So I did get some information pertaining to that, but it does sound like that. Yeah. Most of the industry in the area was owned by one white man or one white family. And then the workers that worked in the area were mostly from the surrounding native villages.
Right. But the natives are not going to just run off and leave an area, are they? I mean, some tribe has claim to that land, right?
Right. And I don't have the dates in front of me, but that land was, I can't remember the name of the act, but it was given to the local native corporation.
72, Nixon.
Yeah. And it's owned by the English Bay Corporation. And, they don't do a lot with it. It's just sitting there. They don't, they don't exploit it at all. And I think a lot of that has to do with some of the legends and the history of the place. It just kind of sits there. I know Stephen, obviously we got permission to go in and film the documentary, and to hear Stephen tell it took a long time to get that. He actually worked on them for quite a while before they finally allowed him to go in there. And I know a lot of people talk about one of these days I'm going to go in there, and I tell them, I'm like, well, you should probably get permission first, because it's technically private property. Yeah. But yeah, it's a weird place. It's just so creepy when you get there, and it's just you see all those. Maybe that's part of it. The abandoned houses and just the woods as far as you can see. The place definitely has a vibe, and I've heard from people that live there. They were like, oh, it was just another village. It wasn't that big of a deal. Mm-hmm. But then you hear from other people that were like, it was horrible. So, yeah, that's
all right. Well, let's go into to touch on the writing process just a little bit more. Did you go? I'm not really clear. So the book and the movie, did they come out simultaneously?
No, the documentary's been out since 2019.
Okay.
I believe is when it came out. And I've been working on the book probably since about 2019. Okay. But again, like I said, it started out as a book on Bigfoot in general on the Kenai Peninsula, and then it kind of morphed into the Port Chatham book. But I never really sat down and was like, I'm going to write a book on Port Chatham. I sat down and was like, I'm going to write a book about Bigfoot. And then it turned into Port Chatham.
Yeah. Are there other stories in Alaska that rival Port Chatham? Are there other accounts of Bigfoot?
There are a few famous accounts of Bigfoot. I don't think any of them are quite as I don't want to say famous, but infamous. I don't know. They're not quite as widespread as Port Chatham. Port Chatham is probably the Alaska Bigfoot story.
Okay.
But there's also a similar account from Thomas Bay, which is in Southeast Alaska, called The Greatest Story Ever Told, where some miners went in looking for a place to look for gold and got chased out by, they called them devils. And the description doesn't really fit the typical Bigfoot. It's actually, I think they're described as pretty small creatures. And I actually read a recent blog somewhere where somebody was pondering, because I guess there were some Chinese trade ships that had went down, had sunk, maybe not too far from there. And somebody had maybe wondered, maybe they weren't Bigfoot or devils or creatures. Maybe it was shipwrecked Chinese sailors. Mm-hmm. And they were just, oh my God, there's somebody, we're saved. Let's get them to take us on their boat. And they're like chasing these guys through the woods, like help, mm-hmm. But they're saying in Chinese. And and they're all like covered in sores and stuff, which was one of the descriptions. And so I often wonder if that wasn't Bigfoot, but maybe shipwrecked Chinese sailors. But that's another one that's kind of made the rounds. I believe there was a short book written on it called The Strangest Story Ever Told by either, I can't remember if it was the guy that experienced it or the guy that the story was told to.
Okay. So one of the things that we look for on Encounters USA is we look for like characteristics, social, physical, whatever. And you are telling me that the size of the Bigfoot that you guys encountered in Alaska is going to be different than say in now the one that you just talked about, that was in the Panhandle, right?
Yeah, that was in Southeast Alaska.
Right. So
Yeah.
that's a completely different climate
Yep.
than what you're in. So can you just have you looked into the differences in the characteristics in physically between the ones that might be in Alaska where it's really cold and somebody from further south? Hey everyone, it's spring and things are really looking up at Encounters USA and Books in Hindsight. The new merchandise is in and it is looking fabulous. Now, if it can make Matthew Hines look this good, just think what it's gonna do for you. Now, back to the show.
Well, I think probably once you start hitting like the Oregon, Washington area, you really see them jump up to 7-8 foot is usually the size of the adults, I think. And I think it probably holds pretty true for here. I haven't heard any accounts where they describe anything over 9 feet tall. I think 8-9 feet is probably like the maximum, but you got to look at it from animals get bigger the further north you go, generally. Was it Bergman's rule? And I think that applies here as well, where you see the increase in size. Our bears, like I'm from Kentucky and there's not a lot of bears there, but the bears that are there are like 80 pounds, maybe 100 pounds. I've got black bear here in Alaska that are, 300 pounds.
Yeah.
There was a black bear killed in town here a few years ago that was 600 pounds, which is huge for a black bear. So the further north you get, the bigger things get. And I think that applies to Bigfoot as well. I think probably the 7 to 9 foot range is what you're looking at. And we get a bunch of different coloring reported to us. And I don't know if that's age thing or a natural camouflage. Down in Oregon, California, you hear a lot of the reddish ones, the auburn ones. I haven't heard a lot of that up here. Here, usually they're black or they're brown or they're white. And I wonder sometimes about the white, because most of the sightings of the white ones that are in the summer. So I don't think I don't feel like they change like this rabbits do, like the hares. I don't think they change color. I think the white is probably an age thing. I think it's probably just like us. They go gray. But I had an interesting report of someone, a Bigfoot researcher from Alaska, was in Nanwalek, which is not far at all from Port Chatham. Most of the people that left Port Chatham went to Nanwalek. And I don't know if this is anything I would ever do. He was playing Baby Cries. And they had something come up and was just shaking a large tree at them after they did the Baby Cries. And one of the local natives said, yeah, there's been a big white one around here recently. Well, that was only like a year before Stephen and I went into Port Chatham. And if you watch the documentary, Stephen sees something dart between two trees and he said it looked white. So I don't know, maybe it was the same thing, or maybe there's maybe all of them there are white. I don't know. But that was some pretty interesting collaborative evidence, because I didn't find out about that sighting of the white one in Nanwalek until after we've been to Port Chatham. So, but yeah, I think, just like any animals, I think there's variances in appearances and size, and just like us or anything else.
Okay. Now, how long have you been, I don't know how well to say, or how better to say it. How long have you been in the Bigfoot community? Before you met Adam Davies, did you interact with anybody else?
Not really. And being in Alaska, I'm pretty isolated up here. I kind of do my own thing.
Yeah.
There's a couple other Bigfoot guys here in Alaska, but I mean, honestly, we all live so far apart that we really don't get together that much. Probably my best Bigfoot buddy up here is the Sasquatch tracker, Michael Thompson, and we've never even met face to face. I mean, he lives up in Tok, which is like that's like a 15-hour drive or something for me. So, we don't spend much like the Bigfoot. I tell people living in Bigfoot in Alaska is great because there's so much room and environment, and there's just so many resources up here for them and room for them. But it's terrible because there's so much environment and room and resources for them. If they don't want to be around people, they certainly don't have to be. So it's a lot. It's the needle in the haystack scenario where I think they're over here, and then you get some collaborating evidence or a sighting, and then nobody hears or sees anything for like 2 years. So they just, I don't know if they move. I don't know if they're just, I don't know what it is, but it can be pretty hard up here because you don't have a lot of consistent incoming reports.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, you guys were talking about Abandoned, the history and horror of Port Chatham or Chatham, Alaska. And we're also talking about the documentary that Stephen Major and Beans Baxter did called the In Search of the Port Chatham or Chatham Hairy Man. So the question that I have, before we go into all that stuff, because I really want to talk about your methods of research when you got on to Port Chatham. But before we get into that, you talked about going to the Medellin Falls Bigfoot Festival. So what do you plan on doing there? And what do you plan on speaking about?
It's going to be a couple of day event. It's June 19th and 20th. I'm going to be one of the presenters there. I always, Stephen had asked me to come and present, and I like to do a little presentation. I kind of do a presentation. It's about half about Alaska and half about Port Chatham. I always bring pictures of Port Chatham, a lot of the pictures that we took. And I tell people, I'm like, I'm saving you the price of a plane ticket up to Alaska and then, probably a $2,000 boat ride at Port Chatham. So, you're getting your money's worth right here. Mm-hmm. So, I always do a little presentation on Port Chatham. I talk about the history of the area, the timeline of the area. I show pictures from our trips out there, and people seem to really enjoy it. And people are hungry for information on Port Chatham. So it's always a pretty popular presentation. I always get a lot of questions afterwards.
Yeah, because I think that people have this idea when they see Alaska, Bigfoot. Yeah, that really makes sense. So I think anything you throw out there is going to get some interest. All right. So you're going to be there, and the Medellin Falls Bigfoot Festival it's really growing. I mean, everybody I talk to seems to be going there now. So I think a lot of that has to do with the COVID shutdown, but we seem to, Bob Gimlin's going to be there. Steven's going to be there. You're going to be there. So that brings up another question. You haven't been in the community for a long time. So, and you say you haven't talked to too many people in the community, but have you gotten any resistance? Somebody saying there's no Bigfoot in Alaska. What are you talking about?
Not from people in the community. Obviously from, for lack of a better word, civilians. Obviously from civilians, I have, I worked in law enforcement for 15 years up here, and a lot of the people I work with, I always get the question like, did any of the cops you work with, did they ever, have any sightings, or did they ever, or is there a government cover up? And the answer to all those questions is no. They pretty much, when my Bigfoot cover was blown, because I worked a long time. Well, I operated a long time without telling anybody about my interest in Bigfoot, mainly because I didn't want the stigma, I didn't want the ridicule. And kind of once the documentary came out, my cover was kind of blown. Mm-hmm. And I didn't get a lot of ridicule to my face, but I heard about a lot of stuff that was said behind my back, just like, oh man, they think you're crazy. And it's a fictional character to them. Like, well, you might as well tell them you're going out in the woods and looking for Superman or Batman or something. It's just not a thing. It doesn't exist.
Mhm.
And the ones that do, kind of like have an open mind towards it, they're not going to go against the grain and say like, well, hold on a minute, there's might be something to this, or I saw something. They're going to see like, man, they're roasting that guy alive. I'm not gonna jump into that fire. So yeah, there's not a lot of pushback from the Bigfoot community, but definitely from the uninitiated there is. Yeah.
Mhm. So I don't know how better to say this. It's like this mentality. This is what I think. If it didn't happen to you, it didn't happen. So, and I think in Alaska, small towns, you don't want to be on that side of the fence, whatever. So yeah, I understand that point, but, is there people like when you say, okay, well, how long have you been here? And my stories are from the natives. What's the answer to that?
It's just not real. It's just made up.
Okay.
And I mean, if somebody doesn't want to, look at politics.
Yeah.
You can sit there and tell somebody, like, you can say, well, this is why this needs to be this way, and this is why this needs to be that way. If they don't think that way, you're not gonna change their mind.
Yep.
It's kind of like one of my favorite comedians said about the elections. They have the debates, and he's like, I don't know why. Like, everybody's mind is made up before the debate.
Mm-hmm.
There's not too many people sitting there watching debate going, that's a good point, but that guy, before you go into the debate. And Bigfoot is a lot similar to that. You have the people that are hard. I don't even call them skeptics or skeptics. It's not real. Mm-hmm. And then you have the open-minded people, and then you have the believers. I am actually pretty skeptical, believe it or not. It probably doesn't sound that way talking to me now, but I try and look at things as, well, what could it be? I don't want to go in and say, well, this is probably Bigfoot, or that's definitely a Bigfoot. I try and go in and definitely keep an open mind to, like, well, maybe it is, but let's try and eliminate everything else first. Mm-hmm. You kind of got to go in and just say, well, I had something strange show up on my trail camera, but then, like 2 hours later, there was a bear. So it was probably the same bear. You can't just jump and make just crazy conclusions from mm-hmm. incomplete evidence. Extraordinary. What's Adam Davies says, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I do believe that there's something out in the woods that we haven't been able to identify or track down. But until we have evidence, it's just speculation.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, now let's, because I really want to get into the actual movie, and I just want to be very careful. I don't want to spoil your book. I don't want to, give away any surprises. So if there's something that we're talking about, just say, well, it's in the book, and that's fine, because people, I'm sure, that are watching this are going, well, I've got to read that book now. So on the movie, there are a couple of questions that I have to ask. That was a pretty expensive expedition. How was that paid for? Can I ask that?
Stephen funded everything. Okay. He, it was his expedition. I don't know if he had any backers or what do you call it, investors or anything like that. I'm not sure if he did or not, or sponsors. I don't believe he did. And it was just his, I think Stephen's I don't want to say retirement, but basically like he wants to, that's what he wants to do, is look for Bigfoot. Yep. And, he funded the entire operation. And that's why, he was basically, it was his say, we could have stayed another night, but he was like, man, this boat is pretty expensive. So, yeah. Stephen will say it, and I say it too. I think it all comes down to money. When it comes to Bigfoot, if somebody was to invest enough money into it, I think it can probably be figured out. Mm-hmm. But it would take months and months and probably, if not years. I think Steven said one time on an interview, he said it would take about, did he say 300,000 or something like that to actually like find Bigfoot? And I was like, well, maybe like 300 million. Cause I mean, you're going to have to pay a dedicated group of people basically to live in the woods for extended periods of time. And you're going to have to compensate those people for their time and very well, give them really good equipment. So I think it would take a lot more money than $300,000. But that's kind of, I talk about it a little bit in the book too, how, Bigfoot comes down to money, just like a lot of other things. It's just how much money is people willing to throw at it. I've spent, I don't know, thousands of dollars. And, I've got FLIRs, I've got cameras, I've got GoPros, and I don't have much more than anybody else. I've got some pictures of some tracks and some grainy thermal footage. But I think, and that's another thing too. Everybody's like, man, what about this thermal drone? What about this? What about that? And sometimes I almost think going the other way would be best. I mean, look at Bob Gimlin and Roger Patterson. They had horses and, a camera, like a old fashioned, I don't even know what kind of camera it was, but, and they got probably the best footage ever. So I almost wonder sometimes if our technology isn't hindering us more than it's helping us.
Well, let's get into that, because I want to talk about your specific methods. And right now, if you're listening from Books in Hindsight, we're going to be switching over to Encounters USA, where we're actually out looking for some of this stuff. So let's talk about your methods. First thing is, why didn't you use a drone? You guys were out there humping through the woods. Why didn't you use a drone then?
Well, we had a drone and we did use it a little bit. There's some drone shots in the movie, but for the most part, while we were there, it was raining, and the weather.
You can't use it. Okay, I don't know anything about him. So.
Yeah.
Okay,
so
that's a good reason.
Yeah.
That's terrible. Can you imagine how much more ground you could have covered?
Yeah. Well, another thing too is, the canopy there is so thick that, there's a few open areas and a few areas that, where the drone's beneficial that we could look into. But for the most part, I mean, it's just trees. You're just looking at the top of trees. So unless you catch one or something out in the open, it's kind of hard to get footage, unless it's a thermal drone, which those are actually becoming a lot more affordable. I've actually talked to Steven about it. I think we may hopefully be able to pick one up here pretty soon. But we had a drone and we did employ it, but we couldn't use it that often just because of the weather. Wow. The rain, the wind. It's just, if you send it up there and lose it, then that's an expensive mistake. Yep,
exactly. All right, so let's look at another aspect of your search. You guys stayed in a group and covered different areas. Why didn't you split up? Why didn't you try to drive it?
We did split up a little bit, kind of towards the end, where a group went this way and a group went that way. It wasn't really well portrayed in the final cut of the movie. It wasn't really that documented, but for the most part, we kind of wanted to stick together in a group, basically for safety in numbers. And that was kind of, one of the we had pros and cons of things. It's like, well, our best shot at probably finding something would be to find a good area and just stop and set on it. I know that's how Adam does a lot of his investigations, is he'll find a good area where, animals, water source, something like that, and he'll just sit there. And I agree with that. I think that's a good idea, but we've got that much time. You've got to make a choice. And, some of the stuff that we found, like the tracks and stuff we found, people are like, well, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? And I say, well, we could have stood there for another, 30 minutes and took more pictures and try to cast it and do this and do that. Or, we could cover more ground. Maybe we'd find something even better up the road. We were there, we were like on the moon. It was like, we're exploring new territory. It's like, well, we can stop here and spend another, 45 minutes or an hour, or we can just keep pushing who knows what we're going to find around the next corner. And that was, again, it boils down to, you had that finite amount of time on the ground. So I think if we went back, we'd probably spend more time there. And that's one of my goals, if I ever go back, is to spend extended amount of time there and to stay there the entire time, not spend the night on the boat, is to stay on the ground during the night.
Yeah, because it seemed to me that Stephen or you had the right idea to use yourselves as bait, but bait doesn't move around. Bait stays in one place. And I just wonder, well, maybe you could have got a different result had you just kind of made kind of a beachhead, put out your cameras and made a bunch of noise down on the beach. Because I'm going to interview a guy somewhere between now, maybe at the Medellin Festival, where he lived over at a place called Lake Cushman. And if you've watched the Rich Germeau interviews, we went onto this guy's property, and he showed me where he'd had these interactions with these Bigfoots. So on the property, these guys would sit around at a bonfire, sing, play guitar. Bigfoot would come down and just sit and watch, and they just kind of have these interactions with them. And so were I doing it, I think I might do it differently. Would you do it differently were you to go back?
I think so. I think we would probably, there's a lake that we want to get to. Mm-hmm. It's up at a higher elevation. I think just looking at the map, it just looks like a perfect place for wildlife to congregate. And I would love to get up there to that lake, set up camp, and spend, an extended amount of time, 3 days to a week up there, just hanging around that area. Mm-hmm. And I think that would, it would give you plenty of time to get the wildlife acclimated to you. They would be coming around a little bit. You'd have a lot of opportunities to observe the wildlife. And if there's anything up there that's territorial, like, we suspect Bigfoot is, mm-hmm. then it might give them enough time to say, hey, what are these guys doing over here? And then have some kind of interaction. Yeah. So that's kind of like what I would like to do. Also, my dream team would include a female or two, mm-hmm. because, obviously Mary Beth was with us during the film of the documentary, and it seemed like, we had a little bit more interaction than we did when we went back, when it was just Stephen, Adam, and I. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, maybe it might have been the time of the year or anything, but I have a feeling that maybe a female might elicit more activity. Mm-hmm. And
well, that is a general rule everywhere. You guys are not very attractive.
I know.
Let me say that right.
I've got a face for podcasting.
Yes. And Mary Beth does have has a much better, appearance. So I could see that. I kind of agree with you on that. However, is there going to be, you're talking about a dream team here. If you're going out looking for something that will just outclass any super athlete, anything that we have. So you're going to have to find people where safety is not an issue, where they say, okay, I will accept what happens. Because I don't, if you're going to go like out in the stealth mode, then you could be getting into a confrontation. Whereas from what I've seen of these creatures, or what I've heard, is that they're very curious. So anyway, so you've got those two things, but if you bring them in with curiosity, they're not going to be aggressive. I think if you bring them in with stealth and firearms and hunting and doing all those other things, they're probably just going to run off and not want anything to do with you. But I think if you do something that they find interesting, I think that's the better thing to do. And that's just me. I don't know.
I kind of agree with you on that. I think, like I said, if we were to get to that lake, just set up camp and just have a camping trip.
Yeah.
Sit around the fire and roast hot dogs and, sing a couple songs and just, act normal. I think that you would have just as much of a chance to have an encounter as you would if you went in there, acting like SEAL Team 6 or something, which, I don't, a lot of hunters have sightings and activities. So I don't know. I think a lot of times we give Bigfoot a lot of a lot of credit for being, the ninja of the woods, but it seems like there's quite a few stories out there where they get, caught with their pants down, where they're like, oh, so, I think though, I think just going in and acting normal is just as good a strategy as anything else.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we've got a little bit of time left. I want to get into the last part of the movie that I think everybody's going to find amazing, and I'm sure you've included it in the book, but you did have some kind of encounter. You got something, right? So can you talk a little bit about that? What do you think it was?
I don't know. I don't think, are you talking about the thermal footage?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think it was a false heat signature because it moved. Mm-hmm. And again, Mary Beth, the female, was with me when it happened. And again, we had kind of split off from, there was a group of us over here and a group of us over here. Although I know everybody was behind us. It wasn't any of our group up there. And again, Mary Beth was like, hey, I feel weird. Do you feel like we're being watched? And I pulled out my thermal and started therming. And what I saw was, you've played the video, you've seen Donkey Kong. Yeah. It looked like Donkey Kong. Huh. And I use my FLIR, black is hot. That's the setting I like. And it looked like a black outline of Donkey Kong doing this.
Wow.
And curse of Bigfoot, what is that? And I start passing the thermal around. I think Josiah, our cameraman's brother, he was there. And I'm like, what do you see? And he looks and he goes, that looks like a dude. Huh. He's a younger kid. Uh-huh. So he's like, that looks like a dude. And Mary Beth, was looking at it and I'm looking at it. And then finally I'm like, man, you know what? Maybe I should hit record on this thing. So I get the thermal back from Toad. That's Josiah's brother. It's a nickname, like Beans. Yeah. And I hit the record. Well, by that time it had kind of moved. It was moving back into the brush. And it was still daylight enough that I feel like I should have been able to see it with my naked eye. Uh-huh. But that area that I was therming into was really dense. So I don't know. It was either perfectly camouflaged or it was invisible, which I don't think that's a thing, but maybe. Or, it was behind some foliage just enough that I could get the heat off of it, but couldn't see it with my naked eye. So I don't know. One of those three things has to be it. We did get some false readings with the therm, but, we were able to debunk those. It was just like a hot spot on the stump. A lot of times decaying vegetation will put off heat. Mm. And we were able to walk up there. Oh yeah, that's just that, that's just that moss growing on the stump. That's nothing. But yeah, I don't know what it was. I wish I did. Okay.
So what was the distance? How far was it?
It was probably about, that's FLIR that I have. I think it says that it can pick up heat at about 100 yards. That is not true. I would say that we were probably less than half that. So probably, 50 to 40 yards or so.
Okay. So
and we didn't hear anything.
You could have hit it with a rock.
Probably not with my arm.
Oh,
okay.
But yeah. Okay. So it's that far away. What was it? Why was it looking? Do you know if it was looking at you?
It was. It looked like it was facing us. If it had normal human anatomy, it was definitely facing us. Uh-huh. And it was kind of doing, this up and down arm motion thing. And then I think at one point, Mary Beth, said it looked like it was shuffling back and forth, which is pretty common Bigfoot behavior. And again, yeah. And like I said, Mary Beth's not a Bigfoot person.
Yeah.
She's not, she doesn't sit there and watch every episode of, Finding Bigfoot like I have and all that. She was pretty new to the subject. So for her to describe that kind of behavior, I think it lends credence to the sighting. It's just when somebody that knows nothing about Bigfoot is like, well, it was doing this and this and this, and that checks all the boxes. Mm-hmm. I don't know what it was, but I think it was something that it wasn't a normal, it wasn't a bear. It wasn't a normal animal.
Mhm. Were you able to get to the area where you saw it?
We did. We walked up in there. We walked around that area, that thick copse of trees that it was in. And that ground was so spongy and soft. I couldn't tell that anything had been there. We didn't find any tracks or anything in the area. But then again, I mean, I'm a big guy. I'm well over 200 pounds. I'm like jumping up and down on the ground, and it doesn't.
Yeah.
The ground just bounces right back up. So,
Yeah. Well, so you came back with something.
yeah, and I don't know what it was. I wish I had more answers.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, sometimes you just kind of have to. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it is, but it's interesting. Yeah. It's just.
I wonder how many people are listening to this going, "Let's go! We got to find that." Yeah, I hate to see that aspect of it, but I think that your guys' movie is and your book is going to generate a lot of interest in that area, and it's something that people haven't really looked at before. Alaska Bigfoot. I mean, there's a little bit of stuff, but really not that much. So you could end up being like the big guy, the big Alaska guy. And I don't want to take anything away from Dr. Ali, who's also going to be at the Medellin Bigfoot.
That's right. Dr. Ali is a big influence of mine. In fact, I have like 2 copies of Raincoast Sasquatch over there behind me. And I forget sometimes that was it published, I think in 2003 or something. That is the Alaska Bigfoot Bible. And it's not that there's a ton of Alaska Bigfoot books out there, but that is the Alaska Bigfoot Bible. Again? Dr. Robert Alley.
Yeah. And the name of his book?
Raincoast Sasquatch.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, that's fantastic. And let's mention the name of your book, Beans, because I promised you an hour and we've gone a little bit over. And, we are going to bring Stephen Major back at a certain time. He couldn't make it today because he's not feeling well. And we send our thoughts and prayers out with him. And we hope that, he's going to be better in a few days. But we're talking about Beans and Stephen's documentary In Search of the Port Chatham Hairy Man, and Larry Baxter's book Abandon the History and Horror of Port Chatham or Chatham, Alaska. Larry, so it's just on Amazon?
It's on Amazon, and once I receive my shipment of author copies, it'll be available on my website, alasquatchpodcast.com. And if you order it from there, I'll sign it for you. I'll personalize it and autograph it. There's a little box you can write, if you want to buy it as a gift for somebody and, your name's Bob, but you want me to write it out to Steve or something like that, you can put in there how you want it personalized. So as soon as I get them, I'll throw them up on the website. Like I said, I was saying earlier, I don't know when that's going to be. I ordered my proof copies and they were here in 6 days. And I thought, oh, well, that's not bad. And then I ordered the author copies and they're just like, yeah, we'll get them when we get them. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to give you a quote from somebody there. I called them about something. They said, well, everybody's writing books now. So, you just got to get what you get. Really? Okay. But yeah, you jumped in at a pretty, busy time because everybody's at home writing books. So at least you're writing an interesting one.
Yeah. Yeah. That was one of the main reasons I wanted to get it out there. Like I said, I felt I had something that wasn't out in the public eye. So it's unique subject matter. There's no other nonfiction books out there on Port Chatham. It's the only one. So That's got to be worth something.
Yeah. Could you mention your podcast again?
It's Alasquatch Podcast.
AlasquatchPodcast.com.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And go ahead and listen to that. And I just want to, before we go, I want to say goodbye to everybody, but any plans of going back right now?
I don't have, if the opportunity comes up, I would definitely probably take it. But I don't have any solid plans to go back. Me and Stephen have talked about maybe going back and doing a bigger expedition, a longer expedition where we stay on the ground. but it hasn't worked out. I do know that there's some production company that's coming in to go in there and film something eventually, but and they did reach out, and I talked with them a little bit, but as of right now, they haven't extended an invitation to go with them. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Nobody's extended an invitation to me either. Hint, hint. All right. Well, Beans, it's been really nice talking to you. We've been talking about Larry Beans Baxter's book, Abandon the History and Horror of Port Chatham, Alaska. And also we've been talking about the, I guess, accompanying documentary, and it's called In Search of the Port Chatham Hairy Man. So, you guys, this has all of the elements that you could want. It's got Alaska, it's got Bigfoot, it's got gloom and doom, and it's just got all the elements that you need for an afternoon read. So definitely pick up this book. So do you have any parting words for us?
No, just, keep an open mind, but this is not my quote. I think it's from Art Bell. Keep an open mind, but not so open that your brain falls out.
That's good words to live by. So we're going to see you at the Medellin Falls Bigfoot Festival. Anything before that or after?
Not before. There is a Boreal Bigfoot Expo that's going to be in Fairbanks on September 4th.
Okay.
And they're still kind of putting that together. But I believe it's going to be one of the first Bigfoot conferences in Alaska ever. And it's going to be a lot. I know I'm going to be there. Michael Thompson, the Sasquatch Tracker, is going to be there. We're finally going to meet face to face after years of corresponding via email and Facebook. But yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun, I hope.
Mm-hmm. All right, then. So there you got two great events coming up. So we're going to close this off. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, for watching and listening. If you're listening on the podcast, don't forget we have a YouTube channel, and don't forget about the Encounters USA and Books in Heinessight blog. And also don't forget about Beans Baxter's podcast. And one more time, what is it?
Lasquatch.
Lasquatch?
Yeah.
Okay. And so for everybody, and again, I want to say thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I really had a good time. I love talking Bigfoot in Alaska. Two of my favorite things.
Yeah, exactly. So, and next time we're going to get Stephen on here, and we'll have a nice little podcast because we'll everything that went wrong for you guys, we'll blame it on him in public. So that'll be something to look forward to. So, all right, then, everybody, thank you for tuning in. For Books in Heinessight, remember, we always say, keep on reading. And at Encounters USA, if you're hanging out with Larry Beans Baxter up in Alaska, in Homer, or at Port Chatham, always watch your back.
This has been Books in Heinessight with your host, Matthew Hines. Please join us for our next podcast and look for our archives on iTunes and go to theheinessight.com. That's HEINES site.com for great books by Matthew Hines and other great authors.
Just want to remind you, if you like this kind of content, subscribe to this channel, whether you're listening on podcast or watching on YouTube. Also, go to encountersusa.com for more videos and podcasts, all archived for your convenience. Also, we have a wonderful Encounters USA blog, as well as an Encounters USA paranormal shop for all of your paranormal apparel. So, not only can you watch your back, you can put some of our designs on yours as well. So we'll see you on down the road on Encounters USA.